Physiological,
Yep.
which makes you how old?
Around about 59, 60, 61, somewhere around about there.
Not bad, hey?
Not bad, yeah.
All right. Brian, today we're talking about trust. Our listeners have been waiting for this particular conversation because all we have been getting questions about between last week and the week before, when we gave the listeners the rundown of what the next month looks like. A lot of the questions have focused on trust. So I'll give you then opportunity to set the context for us. What is it that we need to know about establishing trust? And then we'll get into some of the questions. Of course, you will also have your opportunity to ask questions. So as we go through the conversation, feel free to send through those questions on the WhatsApp line 0614 104 107. Let me repeat it, 0614 104 107. That's where you can send your WhatsApp voice notes or text messages. And later on in the hour, then we'll also be taking your calls. So, Brian, over to you.
Okay, let me just make the point is, I'm not a lawyer, so the discussion will resolve really much around the practicalities. And I've always said one of the four cornerstones which we dealt with, we talk about estate planning, tax planning, retirement planning, and investment planning. This is really part and parcel of that estate planning that we've already dealt with, life insurance and so on. So understand, financial planners will advise on the use of a trust, will never get involved in the drafting. This is meant to be done by the legal practitioners working in conjunction with your planner. But let's talk about it. Firstly, what is a trust? A trust is a legal arrangement where one party, which is called a trustee, holds and manages assets for the benefits of another party, and that's called the beneficiary. So you have a settler beneficiary who appoints a trustees to look after the trust. Trusts are commonly used, and these are the main purposes, for estate planning, asset protection, particularly against insolvencies, and managing wealth. Now, there are two types of trusts that we need to understand. The first is what we call the inter vivos trust, which is the living trust. And this is created during the lifetime of the founder, the person who creates the trust. And let me say this to you. I see so many people with inter vivos trusts, and when I look in the trust, there's nothing in the trust because they sold the idea of putting together a trust. And this is one of the reasons we get a lot of callers saying, should I form a trust? Well, the formation of the trust is simple. But what are you going to put into the trust? And do you have sufficient assets to put in the trust? Because it's costly to have a trust. But it's again used for managing assets, it's used for tax planning and protecting assets from creditors. So someone who's going into business, husband and wife married with accrual, if the husband goes into a business and commits assets and something goes wrong with the business, and both spouses then could be responsible and held liable for any losses, you could use the trust in forming a business. But again, advice from tax consultants, practitioners is vital to understand why you're forming a trust. And always I've said the person who puts money into a trust is called the founder or the settler, and they can also be a beneficiary. People think that once you form a trust, you can't be a beneficiary. You can. What is important to understand is any asset that goes into the trust, you no longer have control of it. And that is where people have used trusts in the past, and the word that has been used, it's a sham trust. It's not really an independent trust. It is a trust of the individual, and the individual makes all the decisions. And that can be attacked by revenue, particularly if you're trying to use a trust to save death duties. You put money into the trust, you manage it, the value increases, and you've never used, you do need independent trusters. The second type of trust is what's called a testamentary trust. And this is created upon the death of that founder or settler as specified in their will. So in their will, they would say, I want to leave assets, and particularly to minor children. It's used to manage and distribute the deceased estate to the beneficiaries, and often minors, because minors under 18 can't inherit. And I'm not sure parents want minors even at 18 to inherit, because that's the time in their life they've got to start building their career. You know, there's that expression, give a man a fish, he eats for a night. Teach a man to fish, he eats for life. So you don't want children just to inherit money at age 18. The next minute they're driving around in a fancy car, they're taking chances, they're making investments. You need to control it, but you want to make sure that if you die, the minors are looked after. So that's where trustees play a big role. So let me just explain to the key components of trust. Firstly, we call it the founder, or the settler is the person who creates the trust and transfers assets into it. And a lot of people have trusts which they've never transferred any assets to. The trustee, now you put the money into the trust. You can be a trustee yourself, but you should always have a minimum of 3 trustees so that there's no deadlock in any decision. But the trustee is the person or entity responsible for managing the trust assets according to the trust deed. So what so many people do is they create trust and then they manage the trust. Well, that is taboo, because a trust is independent. And an individual, a group of individuals, or corporate trustees can become trustees. And if you've got a trust and you haven't got trustees and your trust hasn't been managed correctly, you can run foul of many aspects of those assets into the trust. The beneficiary is the person or people who benefit from the trust. And you, having created the trust, can benefit from the trust. But anyone else who's not in that trust cannot benefit. I'll give you an example. The trust may only deal with a wife and not a divorced wife. So you need to understand the trust may only deal with children born from the parents and not adopted. So you need to make sure, together with this legal practitioner, that all these clauses are taken care of. More clauses necessary, which can run to pages, which is not important, but more clauses than less. And the person who is a beneficiary can receive income, capital, or both from the trust, according again to the trust deed. The trust deed is a very important document. And then the trust deed is the legal document that outlines the terms and conditions of the trust. And that's what I'm saying you need to work out, particularly those 2 comments I've made, one being a divorced wife and the other being an adopted child. And it also specifies how the trust should be managed and how assets should ultimately be distributed. You don't have to distribute equally to all the parties in the trust. You can have different amounts, and you can yourself exclude yourself from the trust. And I can tell you there have been many cases in South Africa where people creating trusts have excluded themselves, and then they've run foul of the rest of the beneficiaries and had a fight to actually get assets out of the trust because they were not included as a beneficiary. And there's some very famous ones that if one looks it up, you can see people who created enormous wealth who ended up having enormous fights with their children because they were not beneficiaries of the trust. And the advantage of setting up a trust, firstly, the asset protection. It protects assets from creditors and legal claims. Now, if you're in financial difficulty and you create a trust and you put assets into the trust, you have no protection. So you can't circumvent claims made because you've made bad business decisions. A trust must be formed before you create any problems from yourself. But if you do, your trust will protect you from anyone making a claim against the trust. It also ensures that assets are provided for future generations. And the trust deed will talk about future generations, may talk about children, may talk about grandchildren. A very important component. It helps with estate planning, helps in managing and distributing assets according to the founder's wishes, and also most important, can reduce estate duty and taxes. Give you an example. You lend the trust 5 million rand. 30 years later, that 5 million rand is worth 40 million rand. Only in your estate for death duties will 5 million be included. All the growth in the trust will be excluded from death duties. There are other problems the other way around. There are taxes you have to pay in the trust, higher capital gains, but a lot of people use that for certainly for estate planning. And then continuity, very important. Assets in a trust are managed continuously, even after the founder's death, provides financial support and stability to beneficiaries, and then lastly, the tax benefits. Certain trusts offer tax advantage, such as reducing income tax or capital gains tax, but it's not a tax scheme. It's certainly not meant to be used. And if someone says form a trust because there'll be tax savings, that's not the purpose. That's the last reason to try and circumvent. Because as you know, our tax law allows avoidance. It doesn't allow evasion. You can make use of all the tax loopholes, which there are many, but you can't circumvent not paying taxes. I must warn you, the costs of setting up a trust and maintaining a trust can be expensive. There's every time you want to talk to the trustees. If you look at, people who got trusts overseas are petrified to talk to the trustees because they charge you in pounds. So before you know it, you've had a conversation and you've been charged £250 for a simple question. £250,000 is 6,000 rand. So certainly international trusts, local trusts. Costs are going up because trustees have more responsibilities. A trustee is responsible for any actions in the trust where they may have acted inappropriately, so they have professional indemnity insurance to protect them. That's also costly. And professional fees for trustees and legal advice come at a cost, as I mentioned. Very important to understand that. And then the complexity. Managing a trust requires compliance with very much legal and regulatory requirements. There are requirements, more and more requirements since we were grey listed, and trustees must maintain accurate records and tax returns for the trust. You as the individual lose control. Once assets are transferred to the trust, you lose control. The assets are controlled by trustees, of which you may be one. And some of the trustees may not like what you're doing because they have a legal responsibility to beneficiaries. So you as the founder may say, I want to go and buy a Ferrari, and the beneficiaries and the trustees may say, no, there's not enough assets in the trust and it's not appropriate. So they do have control over the trust. And trustees must always act in the best interests of the beneficiaries. So, steps to set up a trust: decide on the type of trust, choose between an inter vivus or a testamentary trust, draft the trust deeds, and then appoint legal people. And then assets need to be transferred into the trust, and then you need to register the trust with the master, and the master has control over the trust. So the important thing is, if you're going to create an inter vivus trust, why are you creating it? And in the event of your death in your will, understand why a testamentary trust really is continuation of assets and continuation of protecting assets from abuse, and at the same time protecting minors. Cathy, you've been making a lot of notes there.
Yeah. Thanks for that roundup, Brian. I think it's really quite helpful. So when you talk about this idea of losing assets once they go into a
losing
trust.
Control.
Yes, losing control of the assets.
Yes.
Apologies. Losing control of the assets once they go into a trust. What people often do is say, Cathy's opening up a trust, so I will make Lebo and Kanya my producers. I'll make them the trustees. Why? Because we are very close, and I know I can bully them from time to time.
They'll rubber stamp whatever you want them to do.
Yes, well, whatever I say will be what goes. That has been the modus operandi over the years.
In South Africa.
Is it just a South African phenomenon?
Not globally. Globally, trusts are managed correctly. In South Africa, people have created trusts for the exact reason you said. Just get my brother and my friend and everything. Yes. And then every time I want to do something, which most people don't do, I get a resolution signed. You have to say what I'm doing, and all trustees have to sign. But trustees are legally liable to other beneficiaries for any inappropriate actions. I'll give you one example. I've got a particular trust at the moment. The settler, which was the father, sold a property, got everyone to rubber stamp the sale of the property, and gave a second bond of 13 million rand. The sale of the property was 39 million. The buyer got 26 million from the bank. He gave a second bond of 13 million. He dies. two of the other children who are not trustees can claim against the trustees for acting inappropriately. Why did you give a second bond? What security did you have? And ask all these questions. And that and then claims can be made against trustees, both legally and for financial reward.
Is that something we see often, though, in South Africa?
Not yet, but it's coming. Because now, after grey listing, trustees are now falling in line. Trustees are charging proper fees. Because let me tell you, when people appoint friends and trustees, they don't pay trustee fees.
Yes.
But a proper trust needs an independent trustee, and then other trustees can be family members. But an independent trustee is there to make sure that you act appropriately. But sorry, Cathy, maybe I stopped you there.
No, so when we look at what has been done in the country, and this applies also to business people, politicians, many of them seem to have gone with the idea of forming trusts, which often seem to protect the assets that they have gotten, sometimes out of dubious work, but sometimes not. And that seems to be why people gravitate towards the formations of trust.
Okay, let me deal with that, because I see we're coming up to our break. Let me deal with that straight afterwards.
All right, that's fine. We're edging towards 11:30. We, of course, will take the headlines. When we continue, I'm back with your calls. I'm back with your voice note questions and text messages. It's 10:30.
Thank you, Cathy. News headlines at 10:30 on SAFM. I am Ondalambana, and a very good morning. Parliament says it has not yet decided when it will be able to establish portfolio committees required to hold the different ministers accountable to their duties and oath of office. Education expert Professor Mary Metcalf says the biggest challenge facing the country's education system is inequality. And the unavailability of beds at Fair Hospital's maternity ward in East London in the Eastern Cape is affecting patients. Patients say they sleep on couches and benches in the ward's foyer. A full update follows at the top of the hour.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand is currently trading at 18 rand 43 to the dollar, 23 rand 27 to the pound, and 19 rand 75 to the euro. Markets in Asia were green across the board at the closing bell. The JSE mixed in mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe have extended losses. Gold is trading at $2,329, platinum $978 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $89.91 a barrel.
Are you ready to take your brand to a whole new level? Have you ever thought about how big companies use strong PR to get more people to know about their brands? The Allure Group presents the inaugural Building a Brand Through PR Masterclass. Join us on Wednesday, July 3rd from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the DP World Wonders Stadium in Johannesburg. Learn from 12 industry experts as they share their case studies and personal testimonies that will transform your approach to brand building. Visit www.prmasterclass.co.za to get your tickets. Only 650 rands for an in-person experience, or join us virtually for just 350 rands. Don't miss this chance to master the art of PR and take your brand to the next level. Building a brand through PR Masterclass, powered by Independent Media.
Harambee Stars plan to lead the Warriors empty-handed, but Zim says the visitors will travel back home with sad faces. The East takes on the South. This is the Hollywood Bets COSAFA Cup 2024. East African guest nation Kenya versus Zimbabwe. This Tuesday, 2 July at 12 midday. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4 and SABC radio stations. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag We Love It Here. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday. Talking Finance with Brian Hirsch, making sense of your finance.
If you have a life insurance but you are smoking weed only, do they consider you as a smoker or a non-smoker?
He wants to know that if you smoke weed, marijuana.
But I can tell you, if you tell the insurance company, I don't smoke, but I smoke weed and marijuana, I think they may either load you or decline you.
I don't know why, man. Yeah, hey, 'cause I'm high, 'cause I'm high, 'cause I'm high. Are you really high, though, man? He really is high, man. Shoot, shoot, shooty-doo-wah.
You asked for it. Don't act all shy now that it's on air. Like you didn't know this is what you wanted.
I'm fascinated how you bopping around in that chair to that music.
It's your music.
My music.
This is what you listen to on weekends when you're not on air. All right, we continue talking finance with Brian Hirsch. Today we're dealing with the issue of trust. I see some of you already getting lined up on the calls. I'll take your calls in a moment. Brian, just answer that question for me, please.
Okay, so understand, if you transfer assets into a trust, let's assume this individual had transferred the property into the trust, and now he wants to sell the trust, and the trustees don't feel that it's an appropriate price, it's below. The trustees don't feel that he can give a second bond because there's no surety on that second bond. They could say to that individual, you can't sell the property. Now, where it's a sham trust, you go ahead and sell it. But where you've got proper trustees who have liability by making the appropriate decisions in the best interest of all beneficiaries, and if you put in the trust, my beneficiaries are children and grandchildren, well, those can come back to bite those trustees many years later, so they're going to be very careful.
Who gets to determine whether a trust is a sham trust or whether it's a legitimate trust?
Well, let me put it right. If it's not an appropriate trust, if you, the individual, are running the trust, and let's assume now you get into debt, and creditors can't come against a trust unless they can prove that it's a sham trust, then they may unwind the trust and be able to attack and attach assets in the trust. If it's properly run, they won't be able to do anything because you are not in control. So who gets to decide that? I can tell you right now, if anyone listening online is a trustee and you making all the decisions, beware, because there's so much information that the master can pick up today that maybe they was not able to pick up today. They have phenomenal systems, both revenue and the master's office have phenomenal systems to pick up information. Clean up your trust if you are running that trust as if it's your own. Anyone's got professional trustees, and it can be a firm, it can be individuals, but everyone has to apply their mind and act appropriately in the best interest, not of the settler, not the person who put the money in, but of all the trustees.
Let me go to Soweto. Mbuyisa, good morning. Good morning, Mbuyisa.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes. Morning, Brian.
Good morning to you.
Morning. I just wanted to know, Brian, do you know these ESOP shares?
Who?
ESOP shares. Yeah, ESOP shares.
No.
The employee share ownership scheme or programs. Do you know them? Haven't you heard of them?
No, of which company?
I'm just generalizing, Brian. I just wanted to know, can you put them in a trust deed and maybe register a trust? And then my second question is, where do you lodge these trustees? Do you lodge them at the masters, or where do you lodge them?
No, you hold it, but the master approves it, gives a letter of authority that who the trustees are. If there are any changes, all done through the master's office. But why would you want to put shares in a trust other than ultimately to avoid increasing capital value, which will help to avoid death duties? But then you've got to understand, if there's anything sold in the trust, you pay capital gains at twice the amount of what an individual pays, although there is what's called attribution. At the moment, a trust individual will pay 40% of the gain, whereas 40% of the gain is added to their taxable income, whereas in the trust it's 80%. But today you can attribute that 80% to the individual to only pay tax at 40%. But that is being looked at. And remember, it's not about today. If you're talking about a trust, you're talking a 5, 10, 20-year situation. Who knows how that's going to change? But it has been prioritised in the Davis Committee's recommendation that there's no attribution from a trust, and the trust pays tax, and the trust pays tax at 45%.
Okay, so it wouldn't be wise to put these ESOP shares in the trust.
Well, I'm not saying that because I don't know the circumstances, and I don't know. But who's ESOP? Is ESOP a private company?
Yeah, say a private company wants to give its employees shares, and then they'd want to put them in a trust. So,
what value? Just give me some idea.
Maybe say it's valued at about 5 million, and then.
Already you've spoken about 5 million, so there's meaningful value attached to that. So a trust could be the answer. You would need to discuss this with a trust practitioner to see the best way going about it. Need to understand what's likely to happen to those shares. But then there are costs involved. You need to have a look at what dividends are paid and what the costs are, and how you're going to fund the cost of a trust. So I'm just giving you very much a brief outline, but talk to a practitioner, trust practitioner.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brian.
Pleasure.
Okay, Mbuyisa, all the best, eh?
Thank you. Bye.
Edward, you're in Carltonville. Good morning.
Just before Edward comes on, just
sure.
one point.
Sure, just hang on, Edward.
Sorry, just to continue. Now, that was meaningful. A 5 million rand share is meaningful. Someone who gets shares of 50 to 100,000 is meaningful, and I'm not minimizing that award, but it doesn't make sense at that level to have it in a trust because the costs are too high, and the costs will absorb dividends and all those things. So, again, it's quantum and also protection.
Mm. You're actually bringing me to a question I wanted to ask earlier, Brian, and that's really around the value of assets that go into a trust. Is there a particular threshold where you think if you're going to be putting in assets to the tune of X amount, then absolutely do it in a trust?
No, still not, because what is the purpose? If the purpose is protection against creditors, and you want to, is it death duties, which is the least reason why you form a trust? The continuing protection of families and protection against creditors would be two important ones before you start talking about trying to save debt duties ultimately. Because ultimately when those assets come out of the trust, you've got to pay capital gains tax. And at the moment, you can still pay the same tax as an individual, but that can change in the next number of years. Revenue are looking at all ways of collecting further taxes.
Okay. Edward, you're in Carltonville. Good morning.
Morning, Cathy. Morning, Brian.
Morning, Edward.
How are you guys?
I'm fine, and Cathy's been bopping at my music, so she's well, I can tell you.
No, I also love that advert.
Cathy's got great moves, I must tell you. Great moves.
Don't believe everything you hear, Edward.
No, I must, Cathy, especially when it comes from Brian.
Well, Edward, just to digress for a second, there was a British Lions and headed up the newspapers, Tony O'Reilly in the UK, and he came out of his offices one evening and he didn't have a newspaper, so he walked across the road to a newspaper vendor and he asked for a newspaper. He gave the guy £1, he gave him the newspaper, and the newspaper vendor walked off, and he said, "Hey, where's my change?" He said, "There's no change, sir." He said, "What do you mean? You know I am." He says, "You're the big boss of all the newspapers." He says, "Yes." And look at the newspaper. It says 60p and I gave you £1. And the newspaper vendor turned around and said, "Sir, don't believe everything you read in newspapers." Okay.
Point made, Brian.
Edward, fire away.
Edward, what's your question?
Yes, Brian, my question is, if you know there are trusts whereby you an attorney or a law firm opens a trust on your behalf, say because of medical conditions, or because you were involved in an accident, now they say you can't be in charge of your trust.
Yeah.
Then what happens is that they open up a trust with, say, for example, with an FSP. Now, as a beneficiary, you want to move that trust, because before you were involved in an accident or before you got the trust, you were having products with a certain company, which you trusted that they will handle your finances and all that. Now that you were involved in an accident, now the attorneys have opened a trust for you, and you want to move it from the company which they have opened up with to another company of your own choice.
Yeah. And
is it possible to do that? And if the company is to resist, what are the ways to go about it?
Okay, Edward, don't confuse the formation of a trust and putting assets into the trust to the financial provider. The financial provider may look after the investments in a trust on behalf of the trustees, and if you may be unhappy with the financial advisor, it may not be necessary to move the trust from company A to company B, or trust company A to trust company B. Alternatively, if you're not getting service from trust company A, you can move it to trust company B. You can set up a new trust, transfer the assets into the new trust without incurring capital gains tax. So it can be done, but don't confuse the two roles. I provide advice to many trusts, but the trustees have to okay the advice I give the trustees. They rubber stamp the trust, and often they may not have the knowledge, but depending on the financial planner's ability to advise and experience. But there are two different parties. There's a trust with trustees, and I'll give you an example. I had a phone call this morning from a lady who's got a real problem because she got a letter from Momentum telling her that her husband has got a policy maturing. Her husband has got Alzheimer's, and the attorneys need, the insurance company need the husband to sign the documentation, and the husband's not capable, and now they've told her that she has to get a curator, and the costs of the curator are enormous. So understand again, if someone's not capable or someone's struggling, then the best way of maintaining those assets is through a trust, because then at least the trustees can make decisions. But if you don't have a trust and someone is incapable, because remember, a power of attorney ends when the person's incapable of making decisions. So, Edward, yes, you can move the trust, you can move the assets, but not because now the new trustees are more obliging to follow your wishes. Move it for the right reason.
Hello.
All right, Brian. I do get that. So, like I said, before I got the trust, I was with a certain company, and I trusted that company. I want all of my things to be under one company. Now, this trust is opened and it's sitting with another company, and I'm not happy with that company. I've never liked that company before.
Okay. So in that case, you can move the company. You'd have to go through the master's office to get rid of the one trust company. But remember, don't confuse it. You said your investments are with one company. That's fine. And now the investments in that one company are now in the trust. You're not happy with the trustees. Have reasons and find out what the costs are of moving to another company, because now the trust companies are charging a lot more. Find out what those costs are, because they can be exorbitant. But there's no problem moving. But get advice from the company that you intend to move to, who are going to be your new trustees. Edward?
All right, Brian. Yeah, that's okay. Loud and clear.
Okay.
Brian and Cathy, can I take you up on something, please?
Yeah.
Brian, since you've been in this industry for a very long time, and I believe you might have met young advisors who who failed to get their RE1 or RE5, and now they have not been practicing. They are no more in the industry, and they would like to get back. I don't know if, Brian, you can maybe assist them, because sometimes in terms of finance, they can't book their RE exams because they don't have the funds. I was wondering if maybe, Brian, you can set up something to assist those who are from previously disadvantaged background.
Okay, let me talk to my organization. Let me talk to our compliance officer. Let me talk to our fund managers, and let's see if there's anything that can be done. I will report back. Maybe not next week, maybe only the week after. Thanks for that, Edward.
All right, Brian. I'll leave my details because I want to be the first on that group, Brian.
Okay, perfect, Edward. Okay, we'll take you.
All right.
We'll take you back. Thanks, Edward.
All right, Edward. Thanks, Edward. Edward out in Carltonville. And I must say, I mean, you won't necessarily say this, Brian, but I'll say it on your behalf, that Brian has actually mentored a lot of young people over the years that are not so young people, in fact. Some of them have gone on to hold really significant positions in different parts of industry in this country. So I know that mentorship is something that he takes very seriously.
Thanks, Cathy. It's putting back.
Yeah.
And Edward was very kind. He didn't say, Brian, I know you've had 59 years experience in this business. And I haven't had 1 year, 59 times. I can assure you, because I learn every single day from callers who ask me questions, from clients who consult with me. You learn all the time. You never stop learning.
All right. We're going to continue taking your questions for Brian. Anonymous in Friedenberg. We'll kick it off with you after this break.
Hello everybody, Winter M over here. Very excited to be on the biggest show on television. Deal or No Deal Celebrity, coming to you every Saturday, 6 p.m. on SABC1.
Banyana Bus Style target 3 points to continue enjoying the good life on the summit. But Northern Cape ladies can't wait to demonstrate why happiness is their middle name. This is the Hollywood Bet Super League. Catch the Mzansi Queens of the beautiful game, Mamelodi Sundowns Ladies FC versus Richmond United Ladies FC on Saturday, 6 July at 2:30 p.m. Live on SABC1 and SABC radio stations. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. #We love it here. Brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday. Talking Finance with Brian Hirsch, making sense of your finance.
Well, this week we are dealing with one of the components, the core components of financial plan, which is trust. And we've been breaking down the issue of trust with Brian Hirsch. I'm still taking your calls on 086 000 2032 on the WhatsApp line 0614 104 107. I'm going to play your voice notes in a moment. Anonymous, you're in Friedenberg. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning.
Brian, I have a problem and I'm between a rock and a hard place now. My father died 10 years ago and he left the house in Milton in Cape Town to me and my brothers. Unfortunately, my brothers died about 3 years ago of the coronavirus. Two of my brothers, now I'm alone and my mother is still alive. And then last week, we went to the master's office and the master signed everything off to me. And then last week I went to ask about this. I saw they did about 6 single quarters in my father's yard there by Milton. And then I investigated further and they said the house was sold. But I'm in possession of all the papers. And they said the house was bought cash. Now I asked who did buy the house. The people can't give me an answer. What must I do? I'm so livid. And they make 10,000 a month out of that property.
Okay.
And I didn't even get 1 cent.
Okay. Anonymous, I'm going to pass you back to our producers just to take your number down. Firstly, just one question. When your brother died, did he leave the half share to you?
Yes. And
okay, so he didn't leave it to anyone else?
No.
So when your father died, you and your brother inherited the property. Was it transferred into both your names?
My brother was actually the executor of the.
Executor just helps to wind up the estate. But was the property actually transferred into your name and your brother's name jointly?
Yes.
And then when he died, was the property transferred into your name?
Yes, we went to the master, but we're still waiting on the papers.
Okay.
That's why they said to me the house was sold.
Okay. So I understand. So this is after your brother died 3 years ago.
Yes.
Something very suspicious. Okay, I'll give you a call. We'll take you back. I'll give you a call. I'll talk to our legal department. I don't ever promise a positive result, but I say you can give negative communication, you can give positive communication, and you can give neutral communication. So I'll explain to you what happens and what needs to be done. Let me talk to our legal department. So we'll take your number back, and I'll call you.
Yes, Brian, but the other thing is, my father left the policy at Metropolitan. When I called Metropolitan after his funeral 10 years ago, they said there was a cousin of mine who did sign off on the policy. But I said, you can more see, it's my ID number, my brother and my mother's ID number. This girl said no.
Well, hold on. If you were the beneficiary of the policy and Metropolitan paid it to someone else, then Metropolitan have a responsibility to pay to the beneficiary. That's easy enough to investigate. You will take your number down, and I'll call you. Give me
Thank you very much, Brian.
Okay. So anonymous. I'll just have to make sure I know what your name is when I call you.
Yeah,
okay.
That's fine. Don't worry, we'll get your name.
We'll get your name
Anonymous.
there.
Don't worry. All right, Anonymous there. Okay, Brian, I've got here we go. Bongi wants to know, is a testamentary trust expensive, costly to maintain? Can the monies left to minor beneficiaries be depleted before they're old enough to inherit?
Yeah, look, there are costs involved, but you can certainly negotiate with trustees. If there's not much to do, then obviously the costs will be less. There'll be initial formation of the trust, and the trust does not get formed until death. So there are no costs whatsoever until the beneficiaries, the testamentary trust has been set up. And again, depending, the different trust companies charge, different sort of fees, but there are costs involved. I don't think they're onerous unless it's complicated. If you talk about policies and money market accounts, not costly. If you talk about a whole lot of properties, and properties have to be transferred, and then trust properties have to be managed, so it depends on the complexity of the trust.
All right. Let me play these voice note questions. We'll take one at a time.
Good morning, Brian and Cathy. It's Nancy from KZN. If a property is held in an inter vivos trust and that property is sold, how are the proceeds from that sale then transferred to a beneficiary?
Very simply. The asset is transferred. There's got to be taxes paid in the trust. There's got to be capital gains tax, but the capital gains tax can be paid by the beneficiaries, who will definitely have a lower not definitely, but in most cases will have a lower tax rate. Once those taxes are paid, by way of distribution from the trust, the benefits are paid out from the trust to the beneficiaries. In terms of the deed, so let's assume the deed doesn't give every beneficiary equal rights, and then the trustees have to determine. Now, this is another complication, which may not be in your case. What happens if one or two of the beneficiaries don't want the property to be sold, and one of the beneficiaries do want the property to be sold? That's a problem for the trustees.
Hello, Sis Katie and Brian. I would like to ask what happens with your UIF money if you never recorded anyone to get it after maybe you die. So Or if I die, and then what happens to my UIF money if I have worked so many years in that space or company?
I'm sorry, I can't give you. I've said before, I don't fully know what happens. I know what happens to UIF if you're retrenched or even if you retire. I don't know what happens on death. But please listen next week at 10 o'clock, and at least we'll know we've got one listener. No matter what happens, it'll be you, and I will find out what happens on death and report back next week.
All right, thanks for that, Brian. I think we've got one more question around valid signatures.
Good morning to you, Sis Cathy and Brian there. I just want to ask Brian, in the early years, a will could merely be signed with an X if the person could not read and write. And was there any crooked wheeling and dealings by lawyers and to favor certain heirs of a certain will in a certain way? So, signing with an X, I think, was problematic. Thank you, Frank Maritzburg.
Yeah, look, I hear you, and I don't know if that's valid any longer. But as I've got a question for Edward to find out about certain legal things, and also on UEIF, this is another one I will, if you can't sign a will, then what you would need to do in front of a commissioner of oath, you would need to get the commissioner of oath to confirm that these are your wishes, and also confirm that you are signing in a particular way. But again, question I haven't been asked for years. I do remember many years ago that you could sign with an X, but I don't know where it is now. And again, we've now got our minimum of our second listener next week, because I'm going to come back to you about that question.
All right, Brian, thank you.
I'm sure we got
so
I'm sure we got more than two listeners.
Of course,
people love listening to you, Cathy.
We've come to the end of our show. Brian, just your details for our listeners.
011-880-4888. I remind you, please give me all your numbers, because I've phoned a couple of times. People don't have any answering service. Let me know where you're calling from. 011-880-4888. And please clearly put down the question you're asking me. If it's in a different area, I may get one of my colleagues to call back.
So next week we continue with the components of a financial plan.
Yeah, we're done with estate planning. We now next week are going to do a little bit more on, let's do investment planning.
Okay, we'll do investment planning next week then. Thank you, Brian. Always a pleasure. It's 11 o'clock. Time for the latest news.
Thank you, Cathy. Top stories at 11. Parliament to decide on the establishment of committees, and SARS announces the start of e-filings tax season. For SAFM News, I am Mondalambana, and a very good morning. Parliament says it has not yet decided when it will be able to establish portfolio committees required to hold the different ministers accountable to their duties and oath of office. This despite the formulation of a new cabinet by President Cyril Ramaphosa on Sunday. Parliamentary committees are created in line with government ministries to fulfill the institution's oversight role. Parliamentary spokesperson Moloto Mutapo says although the National Assembly will have a plenary sitting tomorrow, there is no clarity yet on when portfolio committees for the National Assembly will be formed.
The National Assembly, on the other hand, will also hold a plenary sitting on Tuesday at 2 o'clock to revive the appropriation bill, elect House chairpersons for the House, and elect members to represent the National Assembly at the Pan-African Parliament, the SADC Parliamentary Forum, and the JSC. The plenary sitting will also take place at the Century City Conference Center, where the induction will be taking place. The formation of committee structures will be constituted or will be finalized in due course.
Education expert Professor Mary Metcalf says that the biggest challenge facing the country's education system is inequality. This is the newly appointed Basic Education Minister and DA member Siviwe Gwagube is expected to be sworn into office along with other cabinet ministers tomorrow. Gwagube was appointed into the ministry as part of the Government of National Unity entered into by the ANC and 10 other parties. Metcalf says more will be achieved by the ministry if it addresses inequality.
Those inequalities are across provinces and they are across school quintiles, and they manifest in the conditions of teaching and learning under which teachers have to do their best and under which learners are not succeeding as their potential suggests that they should. It goes to class size, it goes to the availability of books, it goes to the infrastructure, and there are clear patterns of inequality that are related to the resources that are put into the system, and that's clearly related to the outcomes that we get.
The unavailability of beds at Frere Hospital's maternity ward in East London in the Eastern Cape is affecting patients. Patients say they sleep on couches and benches in the ward's foyer. Some claim they have been admitted at the hospital a week ago and have not received any help. This patient explains their suffering.
As you can see, we sleep like this. Every day you come here, you sleep here. There are some patients sleep here for a week or so. No nightie, no blanket. The only thing you get is food, because there are people who come from Utendahane, from Butterworth, from Aiduikwa, who actually come here. Especially for a pregnant woman, you cannot sleep here while you're pregnant, you are in labor, you are in pain, or you're expecting Caesar or anything. You sleep here, then it's really strenuous.
The South African Revenue Service has announced July 15 as the start of the e-filing tax season for provisional and non-provisional taxpayers who are required to file in a tax return form. SARS has announced that the pool of taxpayers who will be auto-assessed will increase to about 4.8 million this year compared to some 3.8 million taxpayers last year. SARS has also urged taxpayers whose personal details have changed to update them on an e-filing or the SARS Mobi app to facilitate an easy and seamless filing season. Edward Kisweta is SARS Commissioner.
We really have moved away from manual returns, and so taxpayers are encouraged to use our online platform, or if those who absolutely have to come to our office, and we will capture that electronically, and especially some of the older people or people who are not able to make this transition to electronic filing. Auto-assessment is in line with our objective to increasingly make the fulfillment of obligations for taxpayers seamless. Auto-assessment means you don't have to do anything. SARS will use all of the third-party data available.
In news further afield, many Palestinian patients have been forced to leave a hospital and displaced people have been fleeing from tent camps in Khan Yunis overnight. This comes after the Israeli army ordered an evacuation of part of the southern Gaza city. The BBC's Yolandi Nell has the details.
In the darkness, straggling lines of civilians began a new journey on foot out of the evacuation zone in eastern Khan Yunis as others left in cars piled high with possessions. With the latest Israeli military order covering the area around the European hospital, ambulance crews rushed injured patients to nearby medical sites. The order suggests that Khan Yunis will be the latest target of Israel's raids into parts of Gaza it has previously invaded during the war, as it pursues regrouping Hamas fighters.
Recapping the top story, Parliament says it has not yet decided when it will be able to establish portfolio committees required to hold the different ministers accountable to their duties and oath of office. I am Ondelambana for SAFM News, headlines at 11:30.
SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide, leading the conversation.
SBV and Wiesbaden can't wait to spend 90 minutes with Eric Tinkler and his boys. The citizens want to emphasize that they have a superior tactical ability, but the visitors traveled miles from Germany in search of victory. Euro clashes with Africa. Do not miss out on the international encounter between SBV and Wiesbaden and Cape Town City FC. on Thursday, 4 July at 7:30 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4 and SABC radio stations. Hashtag We Love It Here. Brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
It's 7 after 11 o'clock. Welcome to the final hour of The Talking Point on this Tuesday morning. Coming up in this hour, we're going to be talking about leadership and the meaning of oaths and commitments. Of course, we are in that season as a country. Lots of different leaders are being put into different positions, and all of it really with the commitment of serving the people for the better at the heart of many of what these leaders are saying or what they're committing themselves to. So it leads us to conscious leadership. But what actually is conscious leadership? What does it entail? And what is the meaning of all of these commitments? How do we move just from words that people are speaking to having it being realized in and practiced in action? Let me welcome onto the show our guest for this hour. Guru Kali is the director of the Conscious Leadership Academy. Guru Kali, good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning.
And Ibrahim Harvey is a former labor unionist, political writer and author. Ibrahim, good morning to you.
Good morning, Cathy. Good to be with you.
And later on, we'll be joined by Dudum Somi, who is the founder and CEO of Busara Leadership Partners. So, Guru Kali, let me begin with you and perhaps your own breakdown of what conscious leadership is. And when we talk about leaders, are there particular characteristics that we should have in mind that these individuals should possess beyond just perhaps what we are looking for when people are out on the campaign trail campaigning or whatever the case might be?
Sure. I think ultimately it boils down to the consciousness of the individual. And in this case, the individuals we speak of are those in leadership positions that have an impact on everyone in the country and beyond on the story of South Africa. So as that collective consciousness, can we step away from just words in the ethics? No. Ethics ultimately remains as part of the story. Even within a household, you'll find 4 different stories or definitions of what is defined as ethics or ethical behavior or morality. And it is the same when we apply it to leaders. They are human beings as us, and in their fallibility, they will prioritize whatever they have the closest belongingness to. And whether it's oaths or promises that have been made to their individualistic party or their spouse or inner team or individual business or family, that is what would be prioritized. How do we shift these leaders? By shifting consciousness. From our perspective, it's exactly that. It's a shift of perspective to see the world in a way that moves one's way of being from what is currently the narrative that we have as a country being one of a complete lack of ethics told by the overt corruption. And yeah, to shift the perspective to one of more of a belongingness, which was the story of the flag that was burnt, if I'm not mistaken, Mandela's dream, the Rainbow Nation. Who are those that actually live with that belongingness, with that oneness, with that love in their hearts? And that is a measure that can, sure, we can set the bar very high, or we can get very philosophical and deep. But yes, from my perspective, ultimately it is the consciousness that will shape and direct the course of where we move to from here, with the various promises being made.
Ibrahim, when we look at the ceremony around the taking of these oaths, there's quite a lot of effort logistically that goes into it. And one would say, well, that is because there is a lot of meaning that is attached to what is happening symbolically. But how do we bring that meaning back into what it is that is being said and what will ultimately be done? Because what we have seen is that there is a disconnect, and it seems so flippant, for many leaders to say, well, we put the country first. They say it so easily, and yet the actions don't always align with that. They don't always say that is in fact the case.
Hi, Cathy. Yeah, when I agreed to this interview, and I had been doing talk radio yesterday, 2-3 radio stations. I'm just full of this matter of the GNU. That I was a bit reluctant because, it's going over the old things again. But, your question, you got to ask yourself why Mmusi Maimane and Bosa is not part of this thing, I'm just throwing it in because it's a very complicated thing. And, I mean, what I've been hearing so far is even the moral, ethical considerations and issues that have been raised. It's honestly, for me, in abstraction. We're not talking about a humanistic abstraction about moral and ethical. This is government. We're talking about who rules the society, the state, government. Those are major issues. And, for example, what has been a major problem at the ethical level is the fact that there's enormous resources in the state. When the ANC took over the state in 1994, South Africa was the most powerful and richest country on the African continent. There was lots of money to loot. And the temptations and the ANC's policies and lots of things and self-enrichment and so on, BE and so on. So I'm just mentioning one point. We have to be careful that we don't go deep into ethical issues without linking it to policies and to corruption and all that has happened in the ANC and how the ANC, that's why it lost the 29th of May. It was the culmination of a combination of incompetence, neoliberal policies, and lots of things. You can see local government is the mess. We've got the highest cost of living crisis. We're the protest capital of the world, the most unequal society. I mean, a whole lot of things. And so you can see why the ANC lost. But today's swearing in, or whenever it occurs, it's really a ritualistic, formalistic symbolism. That's what it is. You see, and I'm very worried. Let me be honest with you. I did a News 24 columnist. I devoted it last week and again this week I pick up again on this GNU because it's in the news all the time. But I really must say, Cathy, the one big thing you're going to have to deal with in this interview, with the panel discussion you have, is to go beyond numbers and to go beyond who's got what post and how much the DA's got, how much the ANC and all the other. Those are quantitative matters. Those are not qualitative matters. That's why Bosa and Maimane said we're not going to, and he stuck his guns and he's not part of the thing. He says you're putting the cart before the horse. You're talking about GNU, who's going to take. What is your objectives? What is your vision? What is your mission? What do you want to achieve? Remember, we're sitting with the biggest multifaceted crisis in the entire history of South Africa, not just post-apartheid, Cathy. The Union of South Africa was formed in 1910. From 1910 until now, the biggest crisis ever to afflict this country is happening right now. So, Lester Kibbet interviewed me yesterday. He said to me, yeah, but when I said what is lacking of this GNU is a policy framework and a program of action, so he says, yes, but won't that come out of these consultative meetings and dialogue that Mbeki has been calling for? I said to him, but don't be naive. Yes, I said that is going to be a very long process. Can you imagine with 9, 10, 11 parties, how long that's going to take to run its course? And in the meantime, you needed to hit the road running when the rubber hits the tarmac kind of situation to address immediately this worst crisis we've ever had. Cathy, black people are suffering the worst poverty, unemployment, and social inequality. Children are going to be malnutrition, hunger across the length and breadth of this country. Where can you be waiting for this government, this thing to run its course of consultation and hopefully come to some uniform policy framework and then let that be the framework of the GNU? So, we need to concretize this discussion. And I'm afraid that what I'm hearing about ethical matters, honestly, it's abstract. It's very abstract. We need to link its important issues because of how endemic corruption has become. So it gives rise to moral, ethical considerations. But we need to root it in living reality, in what's really been happening, Otherwise, I'm afraid, it's a type of pie in the sky. We've got to root and locate it in what's actually happened in this country, Cathy.
Thanks, Ibrahim. And I think that those are very fair observations that you've made there. Dudum Somi is on the line, and as I said earlier, she's the founder and CEO of Busara Leadership Partners. Dudu, all round, there seems to be an acknowledgement that we do need a realignment of leadership in our country. Ibrahim is right when he says that we talk about these issues sometimes as if they're happening out there, and we don't then bring it back home to, well, how does this affect me on a day-to-day basis? How does having this particular individual as a minister, whatever position they might occupy, how does that affect my life? Because it does affect my life in ways that I either choose to acknowledge or choose to not acknowledge. So in your perspective, Dudu, how do we realign leadership? Because as you say, leadership is not just about position.
Yeah. If we were one human with one heart, with one mind, that would be easy. We are diverse. Part of the challenge is when we are diverse, we come from different points of view. What makes people come together? So the fact that we're calling it government of national unity means that there's something that they need to be unified by. And the beginning is all these individuals, parties who are now also part of the cabinet, have to decide what is the unity outside of the Constitution, which is the foundation, because even with the Constitution, they don't have the same understanding. What is it that unifies? Part of what gives any nation or any individual a future, a hope, is to have a vision. You have to visualize something about the future, even when you're not there, even when you're having kids that are starving, people that are in dire straits. You have to know that there is a future that is different from this. Because if you do not have that vision, then you're not going to get anywhere. So the beginning is, first of all, for these parties to come together as individuals and talk about what is that vision. So if this is the future we want, we keep on talking terms about poverty, unemployment, and inequality, but what does that mean? All words have different interpretations for different people. So we need to achieve this. How are we going to do it? Because a lot of the conflict that's going to happen is going to come from the interpretation of, first of all, what does unemployment mean, funnily enough, even poverty, and secondly, how are we going to solve these. The thing that is important is for every individual to make compromise, because you cannot become a unit if you are going to stay where you're at and not move from your original position. So there has to be a way of reaching an agreement of what is it that I can give up, because in the 5 years that we're going to be working together, these are the only things that can logically and practically be achieved based on the limited resources that we have. Part of why most strategies don't get achieved and most plans don't get achieved is because people have 101 things that they need to do when the resources can only allow them to do 2 or 3. So these are some of the compromises that need to be made and concessions. So if you are not able to look at the world through what is good for me, but what is good for others, which is the principle of enlightened self-interest, which is an important principle. You've already seen, even in the way that, the Gauteng situation is going, that there isn't much of that coming through. What is good for us as a party, but what is also good for other parties. And that means that you will have to give up something that might be precious to you, but is important to move the entire either region or country forward.
Guru Kali, as far as you're concerned, is then changing perspective? Whose job is it to change perspectives, right? Because if these are individuals that have very different political ideologies, they believe in very different things. And that's been made clear. So if we're to change the perspective to then have people truly come together, what does that take?
I think it takes love of country. There is nothing you can do in South Africa that is going to do anything positive unless you truly love the people of this country. Not in just theory, but truly understand what that means. And that means not just loving people because they're of your race or people that because they think like you, is the understanding that this human being and I are one and connected. What happens to that person is indirectly in some way going to impact me. At this point in time, we don't necessarily use that word because it is silly, whatever words we want to say, which make it derogatory. But ultimately, that is what it is, because I'm not going to make policy decisions that disadvantage people that I love, which is why we tend to do something positive in our family environment, but be destructive in terms of what we do that impacts other people. But if we start looking at every human being in this country with love, we will make different decisions. Because how dare you be okay when somebody else is living in a squatter camp while you're living in luxury? How dare is it okay for you to pay somebody 3,000 Rand while you paying 60 million to yourself? So it's things like that that really need to change. They're not going to move forward until they have that common understanding.
Guru Kali, let me give you a chance to come in here.
Sure. I think from a perspective side, I share one with Dudu in terms of that rigidity of the individual perspective is something that is going to be a hurdle in what we are phrasing as unity in this. And that belongingness and that love, yes, it is an abstract perspective, but we are talking consciousness and leadership and consciousness. Yes, it is about the perspective. What is one aware of? And diplomacy can be very abstract. And this, I think, would be at least a step towards the very abstract perspective used in government would be love. Who would dare to use something like that in Parliament? And yeah, diplomacy or war. What would one's individual perspective be? Would it be diplomacy or to fight? And whatever is bubbling underneath the collective consciousness of the country as we have these discussions. And perspectives can be that it's business as usual, or it can be that this is the most trying time of our democracy. It's under threat, or people are dying on the street, or great, I can go out and buy another supercar to flash around on a Friday night. What is important to the individual human being? Who is it important to? It'll be important to the caregivers and these leaders. The record of these leaders, we just look at the history. I'm not familiar with the names and the individual stories around this specific election, but it's the narrative of South Africa that has been so far is one of corruption and a lack of ethics. So how do we bring it towards a place where that sensation of unity, where it's not okay to actually burn the flag, where it's not just used as a talking point for treason, where you actually have a sensation of the Rainbow Nation that Madiba had? This is a good question. And there are various tools and techniques, but it's always the individual's choice to explore shifting their own perspective.
Ibrahim, the words belonging, the words love, these are not words that you're going to find coming out in those heated negotiations between negotiators and parties, and yet there is an essence, though, that is needed in our country, and perhaps it's about saying, well, is there space where the two find each other? Is there a space where the two marry, where politics versus what it is that you and I in the street need? If we go back to the election campaign, what many South Africans would say is that we need a caring government. We need people that care about the condition that we are in. And who are concerned about these matters and who make it their business to resolve this matter. So there absolutely is a gap, but how do we then bridge that particular gap?
Yeah, thanks, Cathy. You see, I'm certainly not doing at all, and I won't seek to do that in the first place, is to rubbish ethical qualities, level of consciousness, leadership. But what I'm trying to do is to concretize, to root those ethical considerations, for example, which is the most important thing to link it to, policies. So, I mean, what you just said now appeals to me, and it relates to what you have. What's the best way to concretize this discussion? Let me tell you what is the best way. I'm not going to even go into now, which is why the ANC lost the election. Where's the RDP? Where's the Freedom Charter? The ANC has abandoned the RDP and the Freedom Charter long ago. That is why the black working class majority abandoned it and they lost the elections. It's the accumulation of disappointments. Even the NDR, Cathy, I study these things. I'm a political social scientist, has been betrayed. The ANC has betrayed the NDR. Forget about socialism and the rest of it in two-stage theory of the ANC. That is why they lost the election. Now, I just want to concretize this thing further. Go to the Constitution. Don't even go anywhere else. Go to our Constitution, which is supposed to be the best Constitution and most progressive Constitution in the world.
Ibrahim, please indulge me. I'm going to pause you there. Sorry to do it right in the middle of your thought. I'll give you a chance to continue on that aspect of the Constitution in a moment. It's time for the latest news headlines.
Thank you, Cathy. News headlines at 11:30 on SAFM. I am Ondalambana, and a very good morning. Giyani municipal offices in Limpopo are on fire. Fire extinguishers are at the scene trying to douse the flames. Municipal spokesperson Stephen Mabunda has confirmed the incident and says more details will be made available later. Parliament says it has not yet decided when it will be able to establish portfolio committees required to hold the different ministers accountable to their duties and oath of office. And Eastern Cape Health MEC Ntandokazi Kapa says problems at Frere Hospital's maternity ward in East London are caused by patients coming in without referrals. A full update follows at the top of the hour.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on the talking point. So we thought we would center then the meaning of oaths, taking these different oaths of office and a commitment to serving this country. What does that say about leadership in particular? And what is the role of all of these ceremony? But as Ibrahim has said, much of it has become ritualistic more than anything, and beyond just the moments that are created. It's very difficult to see how it is given effect by individuals. Joining us for this conversation, Guru Kali is the director of the Conscious Leadership Academy, Ibrahim Harvey, former labor unionist and political author, and Dudum Somi, founder and CEO of Busara Leadership Partners. So, Ibrahim, you have been talking about how, at the end of the day, all of these ethical considerations and wonderful things about leaders, who they are, what they should be, as long as it does not find expression within policy, then it remains pie in the sky.
Yes, okay, let me use, Cathy, thanks. Let me use the Constitution. That's the best instrument with which I can illustrate what I am trying to say in this interview. The Constitution is adopted, and Ramaphosa played a leading role on the part of the ANC in formulating the Constitution. Unfortunately, he also played a role in the KVA, the serious limitations of the Constitution, and I'll come to that in a minute. But you've got a Bill of Rights, which is the phrases are sung around the world. But, Cathy, you've got a Bill of Rights there, right? And at the same time, alongside that Bill of Rights, whose phrases are sung around the world, we have the worst black poverty, unemployment, and social inequalities raging. You can't even compare. I was in the townships from 1972 as a member of SASN. The townships, Cathy, were considerably better off. I was there. I was in the townships. When it is today, it's a mess. It's a total mess today. I mean, children, black kids playing alongside sewage running down the street, children falling into pit latrines and dying, etc., etc. So I'm saying to you, you see, MK and Zuma, do you know what they're talking about when they say they want to change the Constitution? Let me tell you what they. The heart of the problems of the Constitution is Section 22. What they do is they say that any envisaged changes in the Bill of Rights, for example, has to be within the limits of what resources permit. What resources permit. So that is the main reason why we're sitting. It's a neoliberal limitation in the Constitution. And they knew what they're doing. I mean, Ramaphosa and what is called white monopoly capital, they had a big impact on the writing of the Constitution, Cathy. Let me tell you, and this is the big problem you're sitting with. And we have often heard budgetary constraints. We have the lack of resources besides the impact that corruption has had. They point to the Constitution. And so this is the big problem I'm trying to say. That is why I think MK are talking about rewriting the Constitution, is to get rid of that neoliberal clause. Because so long as it is there, remember, it's the supreme law of the land. The Ramaphosa and the ANC can say, we can't afford it. The Constitution says that we should only implement changes which can be backed up and supported by fiscal resources. And if the fiscal doesn't allow it, those changes will not take place no matter what the Bill of Rights says. So we have to address these issues. And I'm just saying, Cathy, I don't think that it's even going to be addressed with this government of national unity. That's why my mommy said, you're putting the cart before the horse. We're sitting with the biggest crisis. So what are your objectives? What is your vision and mission? What do you seek to achieve? And in the absence of that, he said it's putting the cart before the horse, and you can see Bosa was not part of this thing. So all I'm saying is that the question of policies has to be raised, Cathy, critically, above and beyond all the ethical
flourishes that I'm hearing.
Dudu, when it comes to then getting to a point where we can change the constitution, right? That is a project that would require quite a long time. It would need consensus in Parliament. There's so many variables that will need to go into it. It's not something that's going to happen tomorrow. Is there low-hanging fruit from a leadership perspective where you think, well, actually, here are opportunities that, leaders that are aware, that are conscious, can easily begin to tap into that will make a difference?
Yeah, there are always low-hanging fruit. And unfortunately, the low-hanging fruit is the individuals. It always starts with us. It's not going to be out there. All these things can happen when the inside of us wants to do something. So for some, what South Africa's biggest weakness has been, it's great plans, bad execution, or no execution at all. So over and above the fact that now this is a government of national unity and they have to work together coming from different places, let's just say, because we are a miracle country, I have confidence. We did a miracle in 1994. We can do it again. They find each other and they create this common vision and common priorities of what it is that they're going to achieve in the next 5 years. What they need to do is to make sure that the ethics are in place. We cannot go back to a corrupt environment. Ethics means doing what's good and right. It's not just about wrong and right, but doing what's good and right, plus being effective. What does it mean for them to be effective? It means that they need to understand these are the results we want to achieve, and this is how we're going to do it. So effectiveness is achieving those results effectively and achieving the results you intend. And those must be very clear. And what do we usually need to do that? We need skills, we need the knowledge and expertise. Part of what has been our downfall in the past is we were doing things out of patronage, out of comrades, but not necessarily looking at the skills, the knowledge and expertise. So that's going to be important. Over and above that, it's the courage. Part of what our downfall has been, even with professionals who are deployed in these organizations, is that they undermine their own skills, their own knowledge, and make decisions that were not right for the country. So you need courage, the willingness to do the right thing, even when it's difficult and when it's unpopular. And lastly, you have to be able to have the capabilities and continue to train yourself and train the people underneath you who are reporting to you so that they can engender trust. We need to have trust in our public servants because sometimes I think they forget that they are public servants because the salary bills are so high that people are actually forgetting that, and they have the securities around them. They are still servicing the public. They are our servants. And that is very important. For us to gain trust again, they need all these things in place so that everything that they promised us they will do, that they will do. Because they don't have a chance. Already ANC went below 40. The next election, I'm afraid what's going to happen.
Okay, thanks for that contribution, Dudu. I want to bring in one of our listeners, Dwaisa. You're in Ezingolweni. Good morning.
You're touching on a very, very important topic, leadership. To get straight to my point, I can only say just 2 words, leadership vacuum. That's what we are facing with in South Africa. We don't have ethical leaders anymore. I think all that we have people who have their own personal interest. That's all. Their friends, their family's interest, friends' interest, and their connections' interest. I'm just going to quickly, because of time, give you just 2 examples. Example of the glaring one of Zizigota being sworn in recently. The man has been charged recently with serious allegations, and yet he gives us a straight face and come to the national podium, take an oath. And then taking an oath, what is that? And besides that, you look at the second point example, you just have to look at the ANC list. Who's on that list? The very same man. You have your Masobos, you have your Kwete Mantashe, who took the state report on review. We have Malusi Kikaba, who faced serious allegations, none other by his own wife. I mean, what do you say about that? What is that? And lastly, Cathy, I think we, as a nation, we just need to come to terms that our last proper ethical leaders were your Sobukos, your Mandelas, your Sisulus, your Mbekis, and the list goes on, and it's painful. It pains me a lot.
Okay. Yeah, Dwaisa, thanks for that contribution. I mean, to think that surely it cannot be that there are no ethical leaders to be found anywhere in our society. I mean, they must be there. Guru Kali, your response to Dwaisa's contribution?
I think that we can find some ethical leadership still in the business space. The NGOs in South Africa still do hold some degree of our current definition of honor. But ultimately, as humanity, the beat goes on. We can have the sense of urgency for right now, with oaths currently being taken, but they're just words being spoken without any action. And the action is coming from the individual perspective. Because in 100 years, we will be a paragraph in a textbook, if we're lucky, if the robots don't take over. But for low-hanging fruit, Cathy, I think if I can get to that, for very low-hanging fruit, it may sound very flowery, but the answer lies in the stillness of the breath. Your caller mentioned we don't have the Desmond Tutus or the Mandelas or anyone of moral standing that can stand as a conscious ethical leader for South Africa. And with what we do have, the only suggestion we could make is for that leadership to find some quietness in their mind. And there's a possibility that in those moments of their decision making, that they may take into consideration everybody with a green passport currently, as opposed to just what they view as the clique that they belong to.
Guru Kali, what you're saying is so important. But I'm also thinking about how I've been corrupted by Ibrahim, and I'm sort of also it's a tug of war, right, between what you know is possible versus what you have on the table, and what you see as being realistic within what you have at the table. Ibrahim.
Yes, we have attempted to engage with government. There was the Conscious Leadership and Ethics Summit that has happened throughout the years with a strategic report that has gone to the president with various business leaders from the country that have contributed. And again, still, we find no response from a collective of business leaders who do understand what it means to find a sense of belongingness with their kin, irrespective of language or race or creed or even passport or nationality. This is something that we have found, and government has been unwilling. As Ibrahim has mentioned, it has been atrocious. As you're mentioned, it has been very bad with the lack of leadership that we find currently.
Yeah.
And yes, it may sound flowery, yet there is a magic there. There's a magic to the stillness that one can find between each breath. And that, for me, for many others, it is a truth. And if it is explored, then we can understand. We come from an academy. So we take an academic perspective of let's test and we'll find out. So from a low-hanging fruit, yes, there is one option on the table for us as a country that seems to have no options at the moment besides attempting to save a crumbling foundation.
Okay.
At every level, from echoed from what Ibrahim has said as well as what your caller has said. And I do think that business, though, still does hold some stronghold to guide a way.
All right.
For the leadership.
Guru Kali, thanks for that contribution. Ibrahim, if you can wrap up for me very quickly.
Yes, thanks, Cathy. I'm going to hone in now on the ethical issues, Let me tell you something, Cathy. The ANC has been saying since 1994 it has pro-poor policies. Now, just digest that for a moment. But it's the very poor people who voted this election, voted the ANC out of office. It's been a big, big unmitigated lie and dishonesty. Even the Integrity Committee of the ANC, Cathy, has been dishonest and deceitful. Look what they did with the Pala Pala report. Look what they did in Parliament. These are ethical issues, you see. I mean, what has happened to this renewal? From 2002 at the ANC Stellenbosch conferences, Cathy, they've been talking about renewal. And in inverse proportion to the emphasis on renewal, corruption, there you see the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. So, at the bottom of it all is self-enrichment, pro-capital, neoliberal policies of the ANC since 1994. I studied this area. That is why we're sitting with this mess, Cathy, and that's why I'm saying when you deal with moral or ethical considerations, you have to link it to policy and the choices that the ANC made. For example, we never had prepaid water meters and electricity under apartheid. The ANC with the Municipal Systems Act of 2000, they imposed, I studied this, I was in Piri, 200 households, they forced prepaid water meters down the throats of people, water and electricity. They brought the army to finish the project because people were ripping the meters out of the ground, Cathy. I'm just trying to say.
All right.
So, there's big policy issues also, in these discussions,
Absolutely, Cathy. Ibrahim. We're completely out of time. Let me thank all of my guests. We're back tomorrow.
Banyana Bus Style target 3 points to continue enjoying the good life on the summit. But Northern Cape ladies can't wait to demonstrate why happiness is their middle name. This is the Hollywood Bet Super League. Catch the Mzansi Queens of the beautiful game, Mamelodi Sundowns Ladies FC versus Richmond United Ladies FC on Saturday, 6 July at 2:30 p.m. Live on SABC 1 and SABC radio stations. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. # we love it here. Brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide, leading the conversation.
The book reading. Please note that the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SAFM presents another episode of The Door, an addict's journey, read by Simpson Kumalo.
I was mesmerized. Halfway through the song, I don't know where the words came from, but I found myself asking her if she smoked, and before I could even finish the sentence, she said yes, and by then I was getting really horny, and she could pick it up. She rubbed herself against me in a seductive manner, and I asked her again, wanting to make sure, "Do you smoke cigarettes or what?" She smiled at me and whispered, "Whatever you smoke, your wish is my command." Heaven, this girl! I asked her name, and I think she sensed that we were from the same clan, the drug clan. I got a number, and we agreed to hook up sometime. In the middle of the second song, I told her I had a surprise for her and took out my pipe. I loaded and lit the pipe, and she inhaled like a pro. Then she asked if she could suck me with the smoke she exhaled. History repeating itself. There I was, being sucked dry in a booth. I did 1 or 2 puffs and told her I didn't have much left, pulled up my pants and left. I drove through Jan Smart's, the same route I had taken before, and luckily there were no cops to check me out this time. I got home, pulled in the garage, and started smoking. I arranged with my new chick to meet at a hotel and asked if she wanted to bring a friend. She said she'd check out the times because her friend worked at the shop at the East Rand Mall. I was excited about that because it meant her friend wasn't a hooker. I booked a room at the hotel near the mall for the next Saturday afternoon. I did my normal routine, booked the hotel room and met them somewhere to give them the key. I went to get some snacks and the good stuff. A friend didn't do crack, but she wanted cocaine. I'd never bought cocaine before, but I figured my dealer would know, so I organized both. When I got to the room, we introduced ourselves properly. I was impressed with a friend. She seemed to have her life together with a decent job and could even control her drug taking. She said that crack wasn't for her. That nonsense will mess you up. You'll sell anything and everything you got for rocks. She was right. She claimed coke was better than crack. I didn't understand how one drug could be better than another. She went to have a shower and I lit up and puffed for a while. Then I realized I was all alone and went to look for my two chicks. They were both in the shower, kissing. As I watched, she came out of the shower and went to do a couple of lines, then went back into the shower. I figured I'd carry on watching. They didn't invite me to join them, and anyway, the crack was getting the better of me. But I really liked what I saw and wanted the friend, not the hooker. I was fixated with her. She had long hair, big eyes, and a firm, tight bum. I started kissing her, and she responded enthusiastically. Then she whispered to me that I should try some of her coke, so I did. The high was slow, but when it hit, wow, I was a madman. I wish I could say I didn't love it. I was beyond redemption and had no more guilt feelings. I'd suppressed all that nonsense. Then my chick cut everything short, saying she had to get home to her child. She needed to do the responsible thing. I remember wondering why I couldn't be like her. I organized them a taxi, gave them some cash, and then I started to smoke really hard. I even scraped the sides of the pipe to get every scrap that was left and smoked it all out. Soon I was on the floor looking for pieces of drugs in case I dropped one by mistake. I was losing my mind. I was becoming forgetful. I was becoming something I never imagined I would become. Arrogant and conceited. I started to withdraw from public. I started to keep a list of cars that were allegedly following me. I was beginning to entertain conspiracy theories. Sipho was helping me in my descent to hell. I remember once he called and told me he'd organized a couple of chicks for me. I was angry because I hadn't asked for that and didn't understand why he was being so generous to me. But an hour later, he said he had some free stuff for me, and no junkie will ever turn down a free offer. So I went to his dreadful place in Hillbrow and sampled his stuff there. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Whoever was cooking that up knew what they were doing. This stuff set the boys from the main. I was raring to go. Sipho directed me to a place a couple of streets down from his home. It was broad daylight and there were hookers everywhere, all dressed skimpily. Some looked really scary and some looked like they hadn't seen a shower in days. Unsavory characters everywhere. The whole place stank, but my addiction knew no bounds and there was nowhere I wouldn't go to feed it. No place was too dangerous when the craving hit. I was a slave to the drug. It was my master and controlled my mind, how I spent my money and time, and to a large degree who I ended up with. Sipho had organized two chicks. One was from Vosloorus. I'd actually seen her in a strip club, but hadn't paid any attention to her. She had a light complexion, and I found out later she was actually pregnant at the time. I took a full moon from Sipho, and he had organized the room for me. It was dark. The passage to the room had no lights. It was an insult to call it a motel. It was 2 bedrooms, and the towels looked like at some time they'd been white but underwent some kind of metamorphosis during their lifetime. I was very uncomfortable, but at least the room afforded some privacy. I cut the moon into 2, and we started on the one to smoke. I was edgy and paranoid and didn't like the feeling at all. I paced around the room to check if the coast was clear. I smelled the setup. The 2 girls took their clothes off and wanted to take mine off too. But I smelled a rat, and my cautious self decided it wasn't worth it. But my drug-riddled self said, "You're not going anywhere, mister." Even so, I told the hookers to keep their hands off me because I didn't want to be naked in that God-forsaken place. I said it in the nicest way possible because I was sure their pimps were waiting. If I'd started to fight with those women, I'd end up like all those stories you hear of people committing suicide by jumping, but actually being pushed out of high-story windows. I couldn't even remember what floor I was on. I started to get really paranoid and check the locks and the bathrooms to make sure I wasn't being set up for a robbery. What if someone walked in and asked me for my wallet and car keys? And worst of all, if my clothes were off, they'd leave me stuck naked and I'd have to find my way home. How would I explain that? I didn't even know these chicks I was smoking with. They could stab me and walk out and I would be bleeding and dying. Nobody would really know what happened to me. In my pacing, they ripped me off and stole the other half of the moon, pretending we had already smoked it. I pretended to go to the loo and left the room. Downstairs, Sipho was talking to the receptionist. What the hell were they talking about? Were they organizing a fake raid? The stuff was really getting to me. I was becoming completely paranoid. Was my mind just playing tricks on me? Was I seeing things that weren't really there? I just wanted to get out of there and worried my car would be gone when I got to where I'd left it. Paramount in my mind was my safety, even under those circumstances. I couldn't believe I had allowed myself to go to such a disgusting place. What if I was found dead in such a hellhole? I walked past Sipho like I didn't even know him. I felt like I'd escaped from the devil's chambers. I was so relieved when I found my car and there weren't any cops following me down the freeway. I was down with a Nigerian named Sipho. I wasn't going to let him send me to hell with his low-life hookers, but I guess I'd also become a low-life. I think that dealers are pretty sneaky in that they almost always give their best stuff to hook a person. But every so often, they'll throw in some stuff just to milk you of your cash. Then they'll say, "It's the same stuff you had last time." You inadvertently think it's you, and you're crazy, and you end up paying twice for the same thing, even though the next lot is superior to the first batch. Life was becoming hectic and unmanageable. My very own life was disintegrating at the seams. I was slowly becoming a stranger to not only my family, but to myself as well. This was weighing heavy on me. By then I was working for myself and had a lot of time to kill. I could continue with my drug shenanigans in my own time and do what I wanted. I officially couldn't live without crack. I needed to find a steady dealer, and as usual I went to score in Brakpan, much closer to home. It was seedy and there was hustle and bustle all the time. I was surprised at how alive this little town became at night. There were clubs, people, food sellers on the side of the road. At 2 a.m, it was business as usual, and you could tell the devil was in charge. I just drove around waiting for someone to see me and know what I wanted. A young Nigerian knocked on my window and said, "Boss, I got what you needed." How did he know? Was he a psychic? I rolled down my window and he told me to name it and he'd get it. I said crack and he directed me to the next street, telling me to meet him there. I drove around for about 5 minutes so I didn't attract unnecessary attention from the Gestapo. He was waiting for me and jumped into my car. We drove away. He had some rocks on him and gave me some to test. He gave me his number and said he'd come to me if I needed more. A great proposition. The staff was incredible. It was hardly 10 minutes later that I called him and we met at the petrol station. Talk about customer service. I was beginning to lose my bearings. Drug delivery wasn't something I'd considered before, and everything was about the drugs. All I could think about was my next hit. I'm losing weight and losing it fast, and no one understood what was happening to me. I was completely oblivious to it. I still thought I held it all together. I would be hungry as hell, but if the choice was between food and the hit always won. Once the smoke is in your system, appetite instantly disappears. I would go for days without eating anything, and my body would just crash, and I would fall asleep for days. But the minute I woke up, I would look for my pipe and my lines of coke. I became a slave to drugs. I was now combining various drugs just to accelerate the high. I took E and crack and alcohol and cocaine. paranoia started to set in, and now I was becoming afraid to use in unsavory environments. I would have to drum up the courage, and the minute I downed at least a quarter of a moon and the drugs kicked in, I became paranoid.
That was another episode of The Door, an addict's journey, written by Abner Mariri. The book is available on www.abner.africa. It is broadcast on SAFM at 11:45 Monday to Thursday on The Talking Point. It is produced for the station by Vovi Patala, read by Samson Kumalo, technical production by Nanda Koza.
It's 2 minutes after 12 on Tuesday, the 2nd of July, 2024. Very warm welcome to Updated Noon here on SAFM. Leading the conversation, I'm Sakina Kamwendo. Coming up in the next hour.
People are anxious out there in Gauteng. They want to see their government working. There are a lot of service delivery issues that are there. We were hopeful that today we were going to get that executive that we've been waiting for.
Well, it's still unclear when Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi will make his final announcement on the appointment of the Executive Council, and
the formation of committee structures will be constituted or will be finalized in due course.
Well, Parliament's likely to have a fairly busy schedule in the coming days. Coming up in sport,
Lloyd Harris through to the next round at Wimbledon. Andy Murray won't be playing singles, and it's going to come down to maths for Bafana again.
Well, let us know your thoughts on all of these and, of course, more to come. Your views, 41391, that's our SMS line number, charged at R1.50 per SMS. You can also write to us via X or Facebook, and our handle is at SABC News_radio or using the hashtag Updated Noon. Alternatively, WhatsApp voice notes. Love hearing those. 0826923909 is the number to dial. Well, these and more stories coming up on this Tuesday edition of Updated Noon. First, though, let's bring up to speed with the latest news. Here's Ondela Mbana.
Thank you, Sakina. Top stories at this hour. Giyani municipality officers on fire and Parliament to decide on the establishment of committees for SAFM News. I am Ondela Mbana, and a very good day. The headquarters of the Giyani municipality in Limpopo are on fire. Municipal spokesperson Stephen Mabunda says the firefighters are at the scene extinguishing the blaze. Mabunda says no injuries have been reported.
We confirm that the section of the municipal building caught fire this morning. As we speak now, firefighters are on the ground to try and fight off the fire. The fire is under control. We, however, are not able to speculate as to what the cause is, but we believe that investigations into that to determine the cause will ensue immediately after everything has been settled down.
Parliament says it has not yet decided when it will be able to establish portfolio committees required to hold the different ministers accountable to their duties and oath of office. This despite the formulation of a new cabinet by President Cyril Ramaphosa on Sunday. Parliamentary committees are created in line with government ministries to fulfill the institution's oversight role. Parliamentary spokesperson Moloto Mutapo says although the National Assembly will have a plenary sitting today, there is no clarity yet on when portfolio committees for the National Assembly will be formed. Eastern Cape Health MEC Ntandokazi Chapa says problems at Frere Hospital's maternity ward in East London are caused by patients coming in without referrals. Patients say the unavailability of beds at the maternity ward is affecting them. They say they sleep on couches and benches in the ward's foyer. Some claim they have been admitted at the hospital a week ago and have not received any help. Chapa elaborates.
There is a shortage of beds. Remember, I am saying the hospital is overloaded because patients are more than the required number, because others are not supposed to be here, but because they do not know, they run straight to here, whereas they are supposed not to be here, but to go to district or a lower level hospital. We are doing everything in our power to make sure that if they are here, we try and accommodate.
A female passenger has died following a collision involving two taxis at the intersection of Voortrekker Street and Ring Road East in Alberton in Ekurhuleni this morning. Ekurhuleni Disaster and Management Services spokesperson William Tladi says emergency responders found the driver of one of the taxis still trapped in the vehicle. Tladi says the jaws of life were used to free another patient from the second taxi.
Unfortunately, in the operation, one adult female patient was declared dead on scene by the paramedics, and the rest other patients